Tonight, let me read to you a few creepy stories. I'm sure you'll enjoy these as I have. Now, the second one, I'll put up a little warning, but it's going to be a trigger warning. Some child abuse, stuff like that. I don't want to get into too many details in the intro in order to keep it brief, but if you're sensitive to that kind of stuff, just a heads up. I hope you're having a great day, though. I'm going to try doing daily uploads. I don't know how that's going to go with burnout and the stuff that actually happens when you try something so intensive, but we'll give it a go. With that said, if you are a fan of the channel and you fancy yourself a writer, or you consider yourself a writer, then head on over to storiesaftermidnight.reddix.app. There will be a link in the description as well if you'd like to send me a story and help keep content coming onto this channel. With that said, in order to not draw this out any longer, do check the description for different links and stuff like that if you'd like. And let's get into these stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the next few stories. I felt the usual tug of the bed sheets, then the downy cloth of pajamas rubbing against my ankle. My wife stirred, inched over, and made room for our son for yet another one of his midnight relocations. Wyatt had done that 3 times this week, a new record. Unsatisfied with my wife and I's previous explanations of nightmares, Wyatt had decided to do the exact thing we told him not to do. You gotta stay in bed, we told him. Your nightlight will protect you from bad dreams. That's why we got it. You're a big boy now, and big boys stay in bed even when they're afraid. He was young, sure, but a child must learn not to be scared of his own room. That, and I was sick of sleeping with half my body precariously teetering on the mattress edge. Up, get up, I said and flicked the lamp on. Wyatt, come on. My wife shielded her eyes from the light. Why? Can't keep doing this, hon. I pulled the covers back from our hiding child. He knew he disobeyed. Something like guilt was on his face. Wyatt, up, now. I escorted him to his room and promptly went to work. He stood in the center next to his latest Lego project as I opened his wooden toy box. Empty. Fluffed his bed sheets. Empty. Searched under his bed. Empty. And opened each dresser drawer. Empty. I split open the curtains and looked outside. Nothing was there beside the dancing limbs of the front yard oak. Nothing, Wyatt. I checked everything and there's nothing here. Wyatt wasn't even looking at me when I spoke. I followed his gaze to the closet. I sighed and continued my work. I opened the door and pushed his row of shirts to the edge, after extracting a few boxes of old drawings and some baseball gear. I beckoned him to join me. He was hesitant but obliged. See, there's nothing here. Just some of your stuff, a few walls and a carpet floor. No monsters. It's not a monster. It's a ghost. I'm sorry. Yes, I remember. I got eye level with my son. It's not Mr. Hickman's ghost either. He's our neighbor. He's still alive, son. Just because he's old doesn't mean he's scary. You know, like Grandpa. He's old, but he isn't scary, right? There was a perfunctory nod, but his fingers still kneaded together. That bottom lip poked out, something he had done since he was a baby. At that moment, I couldn't help but picture Wyatt as an infant, wrapped in my wife's arms as we left the hospital. That lower lip out like our 36-hour-old was having deep ruminations about his life. The overwhelming love and pride I felt would never be matched. And now, Wyatt's wide eyes looked up at me, and I couldn't help but relent. Okay, you can sleep with Mama and me tonight, but tomorrow we're going to see Mr. Hickman. Mama and I've met him, but it's time that you do too. I'm going to show you he's not a ghost, understand? We joined my wife in the bed, and Wyatt pulled the sheets up to his nose like always. He was asleep before I could find a comfortable spot on the edge of the mattress. That morning, my wife and I were putting away the breakfast dishes as Wyatt watched a Netflix show on the iPad. I cleaned and she dried. It was an efficient assembly line we used when a trifling amount of dishes didn't warrant a dishwasher cycle. Could be worse. Susan's son still wets the bed, my wife said, and took a rag to a clean plate. Yeah, true. But pissing in the bed is different. It's a bodily function. Wyatt's problems are all in his head. All nightmares are. Kids get scared, but so do adults. You don't sleep well after we watched Hereditary, and you're almost 40. I couldn't help but laugh. Like father, like son, I guess. After we finished the dishes, I pried the iPad away from Wyatt, and we marched next door. We took the sidewalk, lined with old oak trees, their gnarled branches twisting and probing, for a patch of sunlight. Mr. Hickman's front porch creaked to life as we stepped up to the front door. His home, a 3-story Victorian that towered above every single-story ranch-style residence, was not only the oldest on the block, but also the one most in need of repairs. The roof had gaps from missing shingles. A crack on the western wall had flowed upwards because of a shift in the foundation. Cobwebs hung in the rotten timbers along the window sills, and the pale blue paint on the siding had chipped to reveal bare wood. I supposed if he was a ghost, then this was the perfect spot for him. Mr. Hickman was at the door after just 2 knocks. "Morning, sir." "Good morning," Mr. Hickman replied. "To what do I owe the pleasure, gentlemen?" The wrinkles on his face squeezed together when he smiled to form a congenial tributary across his face. He was skinny, and his clothes always hung off of him like robes. What was left of his hair had been bleached white with age. "It's our 3rd month in the neighborhood, and I felt it was good time to introduce you to my son. Say hi, Wyatt." "Hi," Wyatt said feebly. Mr. Hickman bunched up his pants and got to his haunches. He extended his hand, and Wyatt embraced it. "Good to meet you, Wyatt. I'm Vincent Hickman. Wait a sec. What's this here?" He dug in his pocket, then proffered a piece of candy to my son, who gladly took it. Wyatt gave a cheerful grin to the old man, then looked up at me with satisfaction. I thought, there, now he understands the neighbor's not a malevolent spirit, but a friendly senior. "Okay, you can run back home. Show Mama your gift." Wyatt took off down the porch steps and sprinted across the yard, his sugary present held high in his hands like a treasure. Mr. Hickman and I watched until he disappeared inside my house, and the old man turned to me. "Come on in out of this heat." "Oh no, I don't want to impose. I just wanted Wyatt to meet you. To be honest, he's been having some trouble sleeping lately. Scary dreams and whatnot. And, for some reason or another, you've been his fixation." "Me? What for?" "No idea. Maybe he watched something scary on his iPad that reminded him of you. Or something on a video game." "Oh dear. This is routine?" "For a few weeks now. He has a nightmare, pops that lip out, and jumps in bed with us." He was puzzled. "Pops his lip out?" "When he gets nervous or scared, he pops his bottom lip out. It's a funny little tick. He's been doing it since birth." He patted my shoulder. "Well, you tell him old Hickman said to tuck that lip back in and be brave." "Will do. I'll never understand the mind of a kid." There was a deep, jolly laugh, a Santa Claus laugh. "Hard to blame him, though. One look at his old geezer in the mirror, and I scare myself sometimes." "Ever had kids of your own?" He resettled his stance, the boards creaking underneath the weight. "Nope, never did. Never married either. Work always seemed to spoil that." I tried to recollect what he'd told me when he first met. "You're a miner, correct?" "Contract miner. Did work all over the place. Moved up to site manage my last 3 years, but hated it. After I retired, I bought this place, away from all the noise and testosterone. Sounds difficult compared to my job. I sit in front of a computer all day." It had its perks, but I've enjoyed not having to empty a mound of dust out of my boots at the end of each day. He gave another hearty laugh, and I bid him farewell. When I returned inside, Wyatt was sucking on the hard candy he'd just received. He was lost in the next episode of his Netflix show. The temperature that night was unpleasantly hot. Humidity had fogged the windows, and our ceiling fan was set to high. I was sleeping well until I felt the all-too-familiar tug of the bedsheets, when the downy cloth of pajamas rubbed against my ankle as Wyatt slipped in between my wife and I. It wasn't this movement that alerted me, but the sound Wyatt made. He was crying. "What's wrong now?" I asked and flicked the light on, instantly waking my wife in the process. "The ghost is being mean to me," Wyatt said and wiped his cheek. "Nothing is there. Don't you remember our visit today?" "Come here, baby," my wife said and took him into her arms. "Hun." She gave me a look. I knew when to stop talking. She patted Wyatt on the back, consoling him, and asked about his nightmare. "You said the ghost was mean? What did he say?" "It was making fun of me." I spun my legs off the bed and waited until duty called to search his room again. Another tour in the, at least he isn't wetting the bed war. "Sticks and stones, baby," my wife said. "Remember us talking about bullies?" Wyatt nodded. "The ghost said that my lip pokes out and makes me look scared. But it said if I came into the closet, then it could fix my lip and make me the bravest kid in the county." "Nothing's wrong with your lips, son," I told him. "You just had a bad dream again." I told him this, but there was something strange about his recollection of the dream. Something that worried me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I thought, why would he dream about his impulse to poke out his lip when he doesn't even realize he does it? While Wyatt was still being consoled, I walked through the warm hallway before opening the door to his room. I switched on the light and did my usual inspection. All clear. No insulting ghosts. Great, I thought. Now Wyatt's got me paranoid too. I was about to head back to my family when I remembered I hadn't checked the closet. The door was cracked, so I pulled it open. Inside, the closet was cool. Cold almost. I pushed back his shirt and emptied out a few boxes and toys, but nothing unusual. Then I felt a slight draft. Curious, I swept my open palm along the walls and flooring. The source of the cool air was a spot in the carpet. I got to my knees and began feeling around, tugging and pushing at sections. That's how I found the hinged lid. It was perfectly square, about 2 feet by 2 feet, and the top was fitted with a piece of carpet, the same color and design as our own. Once closed, the lid became flush with the rest of the closet floor. But what scared me about it? Instead of it being a secret compartment by the previous homeowners for jewelry or firearms, was once the lid was opened, beneath it was a hole that looked freshly excavated. It went through the floor and foundation and disappeared into the dirt. I fetched a flashlight and peered into the dark opening. A crude ladder had been built up to the lip of the hinge lid, and below was a tunnel that ran east, directly toward Mr. Hickman's house. I was 14 when I had my first child. My dad was an alcoholic and an abuser, and my mom was a recovering coke addict, living somewhere else, playing house with her new husband and my half-brothers. I barely even remember her face. I remember my dad, or more accurately, I remember the shadow of my dad. He had a huge, bulging dark shadow, stumbling through the tight corridors of our house, drunk and debilitated, crawling into my childhood bed and ignoring tears and screams. Stumbling back out, picking up a beer that he had placed on my nightstand, burping loudly. He'd be passed out on either the floor or the couch, or occasionally his bed when I woke up. I'd make him breakfast in a kitchen that smelled foul of cat shit and spilled booze, and he would maybe be sober when I went to school, but never when I returned. Most nights he didn't touch me, but sometimes he did. The routine of taking care of him was exhausting. My mind felt empty most of the time, mechanical almost. I felt like a car on the verge of breaking down, just focusing on staying on the road, whatever the cost. I didn't notice the first couple of times I missed my period. I was a kid, barely cracked 14, and I didn't know how to track it. My mom hadn't exactly taught me well. I noticed I was gaining weight. I didn't notice anything else. I didn't care about anything. I was smoking at that time as well. I've always regretted that. I can't stand smoking now. The dark smell and heavy feeling, it all makes me sick to my stomach. I gave birth to a boy one night. My dad was out, in excruciating pain on the floor of our kitchen, with my cat by my side. I had assisted her in delivering litters before, so I like to think she'd help me as well. I suppose my boy was premature because he was very small in comparison to the children I've had since then, but I don't know for sure. He looked like my dad. I looked at his little bloodied face, the way he was crying, the way his scrunched up features looked monstrous, the way his eyes looked like my dad's, and I decided I cared as much about this boy as I did his dad. He was as much a mistake in my eyes as I was, and I thought about all the times I had prayed to God that he'd kill me before I had the chance to wake up. I made it quick, strangled him with a shoelace, hid him in the closet for a few days until the smell became too strong. Then I threw him in the lake on the way to school. I hid him in my backpack and the rot held onto the fabric for weeks. I wasn't really worried about anyone finding him. Nobody looks for someone who isn't missing. I suppose I should have been guilty, and I am now. But back then I truly felt nothing. I was droning through life. I got into therapy when I was in high school. I inherited money from my piece of crap grandmother, and I spent it on this instead of college. It was without a doubt the best decision I've ever made. I'm a social worker now. I take care of people. I have a husband and 2 beautiful girls. We're happy. We're quiet. I'm not supremely well educated, and I'm not the best at apologizing for my mistakes, but I live. I sleep with a nightlight on, but I don't flinch from my husband's shadow. He knows the gist about my childhood, the alcohol, the yelling, the stench of crap on me every day. He doesn't know about my boy. It never felt like a burden I was meant to share. I carried him until I didn't. And then I killed him. It was a story that started and ended with me. But a few days after my boy died, I started hearing him. First, it would be cries as I was falling asleep, that shrill, demented cry he had managed to screech when he was born, but twisted in accordance with his mangled vocal cords, from a shoelace tied around his tiny neck like a bow tie. After a few weeks, I started seeing him. Once again, it was only when I was falling asleep, for the last few minutes before the dark takes over, and he would be lying on the floor, helpless and blue, gasping after air and crying his little lungs empty. It continued like that. It still does. When I wake up in sleep paralysis, he's there, lying on my floor, blue and increasingly rotten, begging for the death I had handed him. But when I wake up for real, there's nothing, of course. He's grown up in front of me. The child who used to be a baby is a man now. He'd be 32 this year, and the boy I see does indeed look 32. His face is sunken in blue, and he is still just lying on the floor, crapping and screaming, and his naked body is frightfully skinny. Sometimes in my paralysis, he'll try to reach out to touch me, but he can't stand, and I can't move. I wish I could. I wish I could collect him up in my arms and rock him to sleep. This man who is my boy. And I wish I could apologize and explain. But I am where I am. And he is where he is. Except for a night a few weeks ago. He got up. He stood. Not straight. And definitely not surely. But he stood. He stretched his bony hand out to me, and I was so afraid he'd strike me, or choke me, or hurt me. Might even kill me. I wouldn't blame him. He didn't, obviously. He stroked my cheek, fairly roughly, but not maliciously. And he smiled. His teeth were black, and his smile was unpleasant. But the surge I felt in my stomach was almost happiness. Could you believe it? My boy, smiling. I got the call in the morning. My dad had been found dead, choked on his own vomit in the same disgusting apartment I grew up in. They're going to need a hazmat team to clean it all. I felt nothing at the news, except maybe grief, but even that would be too extreme of a descriptor. My husband and I danced in the kitchen in celebration. My boy didn't show up that night. He hasn't since. I have all faith that he killed our father, that he made him choke on himself, on all the sick he brought into the world, on his own disgusting stomach acid, burning its way through his shell of a body. My boy doesn't show up anymore, and in a way that makes me sad. As stupid as that might sound, to miss a specter of your own guilt. And in a way, the fact that I mourn him now makes me almost deliriously happy. If you grew up in the suburbs, you're probably a decent distance away from nature. I'm not talking about a park or a pond or anything like that, but real deep woods nature. Get away from everything kind of nature. I know I was. I grew up outside suburban Detroit, and the closest natural camping area was at least 4 hours away. My family had a history of camping. We usually went to the river a few times a year, and a few local campsites a few more than that. But we never really got off the grid. Our campsite always had showers, dumpsters, and piped-in water. Fish and game would always patrol at night. Campers and RVs as far as the eye could see. It was fun. I loved being outdoors. I would beg my parents to let me camp in the backyard, but they always held a firm line. You're not old enough to take care of yourself yet. When I was about 16, I had turned a corner in my parents' mind. I was cleaning up after myself, doing my homework right away, helping around the house. I was maturing right in front of them. I was taking care of myself. This time, when I asked if I could camp outside, they sighed and agreed. I was so excited. For my birthday that year, my parents got me a small, 2-person pop-up tent. They said I was ready to sleep alone on our own camping trips, but I think they just wanted some privacy, and I did not want to ask why. That was between them and God, and I was happy to stay out of the equation. I planned on staying outside for a 3-day weekend. We had Friday off from school because of a local holiday, and I spent the day setting up my site. I cleared the land, set up my tent, and went grocery shopping for camping food. And my parents even let me dig a little fire pit. When the sun began to set, I said goodbye to parents, hiked the 50 feet to my campsite, and started a little fire. I ate about a half-dozen s'mores. I kept the fire going until around midnight. I spent that time reading comics by lantern light and staying warm. What I noticed is how different familiar places look in the dark. My house was only a stone's throw away from me, but it looked completely foreign in the pitch black. When my parents finally shut down for the evening, around 11 or so, it looked even more strange. Even in the suburbs, nature has a way of creeping in. Especially at night, just outside your warm little room, the night awakens all kinds of creatures. The crickets sing, owls fly and hoot, raccoons and possums crawl along the ground, dogs around the neighborhood bark and howl in the distance. A lot happens without you even being aware. When I first started yawning, I had noticed that I had probably had enough. I doused my fire with sand and closed up shop for the night. I crawled inside my tent, zipped it up, and laid in my sleeping bag. As crickets chirped outside, I slowly drifted off to sleep. Then I heard it. Cliché as it might sound, I heard a stick snap in my yard. I wasn't worried right away. It could be any number of things, but I did open my eyes and listen a lot closer to what was going on outside my tent. I heard the wind blow and the trees in my backyard rustle, but nothing that sounded like a person walking around. I debated getting up and going outside, but my rational brain kept me in check. If it was a person and they wanted to do me harm, what could I possibly do? I laid my head back down and closed my eyes, but I knew there was no way I was going to fall asleep anytime soon. I kept my ears open and listened for anything out of the ordinary. Any other twig snapping or someone walking through a pile of leaves or something. After 15 minutes or so, satisfied I hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary, I finally drifted off to sleep. When you sleep outside, you wake up when the sun comes up. For me, that was around 6:30 in the morning, and I was not exactly pleased. I had a rough night's sleep and not nearly enough of one. I needed to go to the bathroom, so I put on my flip-flops, unzipped my tent, and walked out. That's when the blood drained from my face. Just outside the door of my tent were a few footprints. They were hard to see because most of my yard is grass, but in the dirt from my freshly dug fire pit, I saw two clear as day. They weren't mine, and they were huge. My heart nearly came out of my chest. My mouth went dry and my brain felt fuzzy. Was there someone outside my tent last night and I didn't know? Did I almost die because I was too afraid to check it out? I felt my legs start to wobble a bit, but I caught myself. I sprinted towards my back door, careful not to look behind me. I whipped open the door and was surprised to be greeted with the smell of bacon. My parents were already up and cooking breakfast. They turned to welcome me, but when they saw my chalk-white face, they paused. "You okay, honey?" my mom asked. Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. "You don't look fine," my dad added. "Rough night's sleep is all. I think the neighborhood dogs were excited by the moon or something." "Okay," my mom said, not believing a word I said. "We made some breakfast to surprise you, but you came bursting in here." "Oh yeah, I have to go to the bathroom," I said and walked out of the room. I went into the bathroom and splashed water on my face and took several deep breaths. I was fine. Nothing happened. I needed to keep my cool or my parents would never let me do anything like this again. I told myself I was being dumb, and nothing happened. I almost believed it myself. When I sat down to eat my food, my dad looked over at me and smirked. "What?" "You're a loud snorer," he said with a chuckle. "You heard me from out there?" I said, shoveling eggs into my face. "No," he said, looking away. "I came out last night to check on you." "Dad, we wanted to make sure you were okay," Mom added. "And it was. You'll understand when you have kids one day." "When did you come outside?" "Around 1-ish, I think." Then the tumblers clicked. "Wait, where did you stand to listen to me?" "In front of your tent. Why?" I started laughing. It was my dad. Of course. I nearly shot eggs out of my nose. My parents looked at each other and then back at me. "I had a dream I saw you," I said, lying. "I must have seen you outside my tent." "Not as quiet as I thought," he said, taking a bite of toast. "I guess not," I said, catching my breath. "Seriously, though, I'm fine. Last night went off without a hitch. Tonight will be no different." They nodded in agreement. I felt fine again. I took a swig of OJ and could feel my entire body relax. There wasn't anyone out there. Why would there be? We're in the middle of suburbia. As the night fell, I once again got a good fire going. I used the stick rubbing method, which took forever, but eventually got going. And yes, I am aware of how that sounds out of context. I wanted to test myself to see if I could get something going, or when I eventually did off-the-grid camping. It took a minute, but the food I cooked over the flame that night tasted sweeter because of it. That night was a new moon, and it was pitch black. The only light was my fire, which I kept burning bright, and my gas lantern. After I had finished reading my book for the night and doused my fire, I decided to walk the backyard. Not totally sure why I wanted to do this, but I felt compelled. I started in front of the right corner and worked my way around the fence counterclockwise. If my neighbors saw me, they'd assume I was up to no good, but thankfully they were old and it was late. I didn't see anything along the fence, which was not surprising. I don't know what the hell I expected to find, but I kept going. When I got to the far right corner, I stopped and stared into the backyard of the neighbors directly behind us. I couldn't see much. They had a line of hedges that worked like a privacy fence. The people that lived there were new to the area, and my parents had met them and chatted between the fences. They seemed nice. Their backyard was spotless. As I moved along our cyclone fence, I noticed something clinging to the top railing. I swung my lamp around and saw a clump of dried mud that looked like it had been scraped on the metal. I walked over and touched it, and it crumpled and fell to the ground. That's when I saw footprints, the same ones I had seen in the morning in front of my tent. Someone had been there, and it sure as hell wasn't my dad. I froze and didn't know what to think. I suddenly became very aware that I was alone in the darkest night of the month. I decided not to check out the rest of the fence and slowly walked backwards towards my tent. I didn't know if anyone was watching, but I wanted to be ready to run in case they were. Then I heard the gate to my backyard open. In a flash, I quickly shut off my lantern. The darkness was sudden and terrifying. I wanted to run to my house, but whatever was back here now was closer to the back door than I was, and they would absolutely catch me. I was stuck. I ducked down and squatted down along the fence line. I held on to my lantern because, if it came down to it, I was going to bash this into the face of whatever the hell had come into our yard. I didn't realize it at first, but I had started to shiver from fear. Whoever walked into my backyard didn't close the gate behind them. My guess was that they wanted it for an easy escape route from when they finished. I didn't even want to think about what they wanted to finish. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, but I still could barely make out anything. I saw my tent. The fabric wavered a bit in the breeze, and then I saw a figure walk near it. It was a man, and he was big. He moved slowly, methodically, around the tent. He was like an animal stalking its prey. I had kept the windows and door all zipped up, and if he was going to get in, he was going to have to risk unzipping the tent and waking me up. The man stopped and stared back out at the house. Then he took something out from his waistband. It was a knife. He slowly moved away from the tent and made his way over to the back door. I knew it was unlocked because my parents wanted a way for me to come inside if I got too cold or scared. He was heading inside and my parents were fast asleep. I needed to do something, but my mind was all over the place. I heard him walking up the deck stairs towards the back door, and I knew I was running out of time. I grabbed my lantern and tossed it as hard as I could to the opposite side of the yard. It landed with a smash on the ground. The man stopped and looked over in the direction of the noise. He turned away from my back door and ducked down. He waited a few seconds, and then slowly started towards the noise. I looked over and saw the shovel I had used to dig the fire pit. Thankfully, I was just irresponsible enough to have kept it out. I slowly started moving back towards the tent at the same time the man was walking towards the broken lantern. I knew I didn't have a lot of time, and I had to grab the shovel and hide before he realized it was just a lantern and not a person. Before he knew that he was being watched too. I was as quiet as I've ever been, my eyes moving back from the shovel to the man. I took shallow breaths and kept moving. As soon as I grabbed the shovel, I ducked down and made my way to the back of the house. I hid along the wall, doing my best to blend along with the shadows. The man got to the fence line and picked up the broken lantern. He turned and headed back towards the tent. I was stunned at how fast he moved. In a few strides, he stood outside the back of the tent. I saw him raise the knife and then slice along the fabric. I could hear it tear from where I was sitting. Then, with violence I have not ever witnessed since, he stabbed down violently into my sleeping bag, again and again. He was focused on making whoever was in that tent pay. My legs felt like jello. My mouth was dry, and I could barely catch my breath, but I knew I had to do something, and my window for action was closing. If I didn't get him now while he was distracted, I was never going to get him. As quickly and quietly as a deer, I ran towards him with the shovel above my head. As soon as I came within striking distance, I slammed the shovel down on his head. The man stumbled back and clutched his head. I raised it to strike again, but he scrambled out of reach. I yelled. I yelled as loud as my voice could go. I kept yelling. Behind me, the lights to my parents' room snapped on. So did the neighbors. All of them, I think. The man got up, dropped his knife, and ran, hitting the gate and stumbling as he ran away. My parents came rushing out, and I dropped into their arms in tears. I never hugged them tighter in my life. The police came and took a report, roped off the scene and took evidence. I learned later that a few people had been stabbed to death a few towns over, and this was probably the same person. It didn't make me feel any better. Nothing ever came from the police report. They never found the guy. My parents installed security cameras and our camping trips dropped down to 0. But I've had a lot of counseling over the years, and I've even gone camping from time to time. Never managed to do any off-the-grid camping. I had a strange request from my parents. I wanted his knife. I knew it was evidence and I might not ever get to see it, but I had to ask. The police said they needed to hold on to it, but about 5 years later, they closed the case and gave it to me. I have it still, a memento of the bravest thing I've ever done. I've moved on from that town and tried to leave everything in the past. Every once in a while, I get a tickle down my spine like someone is watching me. It's probably PTSD, but sometimes I wonder. I always look for footprints in the soil outside my house. So far, I haven't seen any. But last night, when I let my dog out into the backyard, I swear I heard someone jump over my fence.